Hey, Chris Gill here. Thanks for watching another video on building a mix from scratch using only the stock plugins in Studio One. If you haven't checked out the first two videos, you can do that now. Links are in the description below. But right now we are looking at drums. Drums are my personal favorite instrument. I am a drummer. I've got a drum kit back there that I absolutely love. I've finally gotten to where I think I even have some good microphones on my drums. I've got some microphone review videos about the microphones I recently just purchased from my drum kit. You can check those out as well. But drums are my instrument. I love drums. Drums will absolutely make or break a mix, especially a big rock mix. So what we covered in the previous video was our mix bus settings. And so using that, we were able to add some fat low end and add some nice crispness to the highs. And now let's take that a step further with looking at our drum bus. So here we've got this section of drums, and it's a different section than we were looking at previously, but we've got just this drum bus here. And so let's look at what kind of processing we have going on that. So as before with the main mix bus, we have this saturation knob. Again, I love this. We're gonna open this up. You can see I've got a little bit more of an aggressive setting on here, 0.5 instead. I think it had 0.2 on the main bus. But where the magic is really happening for me is, you're gonna recognize this, it is this passive EQ. So if you're looking at this, you're looking and you're saying, okay, oh my gosh, these settings look very, very similar to what you did on the mix bus. And you're absolutely right. They are very similar, but they do have a different purpose, a different function. So we're gonna turn this fat channel off, or just put it in bypass. Let's listen to this section of drums here without any plugins on it, except for the saturation knob. And then we're gonna toggle this in and out so we can hear the difference, and then we will talk about what we've got going on. Okay, so overall what we've got going here is a compressor and an equalizer, and that's really all we're using here, I believe. Let me open this up. Yep, those are the only two modules we're using on this. What are we doing? So first thing I like to do when working with drums, I actually like to compress before I EQ, and I have found that when you compress a drum bus, it actually brings out some frequencies or brings them to the front of the mix that maybe weren't there before the compressor, and I like to EQ after those frequencies have kind of been brought forward. And the reason I say that is, you know, if I'm listening to a drum track or, you know, a drum bus like this, and I think, oh man, I really need some more of that mid-range. I need to hear some more of that snare crack. Well, by the time you compress all that, maybe that mid-range comes up on its own, and all of a sudden you've EQ'd into a compressor. You've now got too much of the mid-range, so now you've got to add another EQ. It just becomes a big mess. So let's take a look at this again. And I'm not really gonna go over these settings because I'm doing something very similar to what I did in the previous video, but you can definitely hear the difference. What I wanna talk about is this compressor. Again, I am using this same compressor. It's this RC500. It's a fixed ratio, 3:1, and I have gone basically a little bit more drastic on the settings here. I believe this slowest attack time is a 40 milliseconds, and this fastest release time I wanna say is like 120 milliseconds. So if we watch the needle on this, anytime I compress drums, I am doing things that are a little bit more aggressive than I would on a main bus. But what I really want out of these drums, especially for this big rock mix, is just have those slamming. So let's listen to that. Yeah, and that's good. And we're not getting a ton of gain reduction here right at this moment. And the reason that is, by the time we start adding some EQ and compression to the other tracks down the line, we are gonna, at least how I mix, I usually get a little extra gain out of those individual tracks, which will feed this compressor, and that needle will be hitting hard. But when I start off just, you know, getting some overall drum tone going on, I just want that needle just start moving just a little bit. So now that we've got our drum bus kind of working the way we want, let's take a listen and see kind of really what we hear needs to happen with these. All right, so right away what I notice is, and they've provided me, I'll go ahead and open this up so you can see, I have just a boatload of drum tracks here. I've got what, 8, So between tracks 8 and 27 are drum tracks. So I've got 4 toms. I've got an overheads, a drum room, and a drum room mono. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 snare drums, and I've got 1, 2, 3 kick microphones, and then a kick sample on top of that. How in the world do you begin approaching all of these drum tracks? Well, for me, the answer is groups, buses. So I love bussing, and here's why. The more broad stroke moves you can make to the most amount of tracks, the better your overall mix is going to sound. You're making less surgical tweaks, and here you're doing overall shaping, and then really that frees you up to correct things that maybe don't sound good later on down the road. So let's kind of take a look at what I mean. So when I start off with a drum track, I really like to start off with my overheads. My overheads are going to be the bread and butter of my drum sound. And that I say overheads, but I'm also including room mics in that as well. So let's take a listen to just these overheads and see what kind of a sound we're getting out of these. And I'm going to turn the gain up here just so we can hear what's going on. Okay, not bad, not bad. Let's take a listen to this drum room. Oh. Yeah, that sounds super sweet. I like that. They recorded that with some pretty heavy compression, but that sounds good. And then let's take a listen to this drum room mono and see what's going on. All right, so what I noticed right off the bat, first of all, this drum room mono has a ton of low end in it. That's actually going to carry some good low end for our kick drum sound. The drum room is already pretty compressed. I don't think I'm going to even need to compress that at all to get that to sound, to get that kind of that John Bonham room sound, which is clearly what they were going for when they recorded this. The overheads to me sounded a little thin. I like to have a good amount of low end in my overheads. That to me really kind of helps warm the kit up. You don't want your overheads to just be cymbal microphones. They are really there to capture the whole drum kit, and your drum kit should have a fair amount of low end in it. So let's listen to that overhead track just one more time. So not bad. It's tight. It sounds good, but I think we can do better. So let's look at what I've got going on for EQ on this overhead track. So I am using this VT1 equalizer. Again, this is part of the Fat Channel XT plugin, and you're going to see that. I think I am using that Fat Channel on every track. So if I open an EQ or a compressor and this interface is what you're seeing, that's the plugin I'm using. So I am using, though, the VT1 EQ model here, and here's what I've got going on. I've got a pretty healthy boost at around, I'm guessing this is probably around 75 hertz. I'm taking a little bit of boxiness away at 500. I'm taking a little bit of harshness away at 3K, and I am adding just a tiny bit of high end at around 5.5K, just to kind of clear that up. So let's listen to these overheads in solo and just kind of hear the difference that this EQ is making. Overall, much better. That is much more of what I would consider a big overhead sound. That's what I want to hear. So let's leave that EQ on. Let's look at this drum room. Let's see what I'm doing here. So this time I'm using the RC500 equalizer, and what I noticed about this EQ, and I didn't really notice this till I started making these videos, the high end on this RC500, as opposed to the VT1 here, is a little bit smoother. It's a little bit creamy, I guess is the word you can use to describe this. It's a little bit softer, so you can add more to the track before it starts to sound harsh or offensive to your ears. So for this track, I'm adding just a touch of 12K to give it a little bit of that air, that top end sizzle. I'm adding a pretty healthy amount of 1K, and then I'm adding a fair amount of 50 hertz. So the reason I did this, and let's listen to this track real quick. I'm gonna turn that EQ off. I love that room sound. I love it, absolutely love it, but I wanted more of that snare crack. Right now, it just sounded a little woofy to me, a little hollow, so by adding this top end here and this mid-range, I was able to bring out more of that room sound, and then by adding this bump at 50 hertz here, and the other thing you should note is I have this on a peak setting, so instead of it being a shelf, it's just a bump right at 50 hertz. It's kind of got that low impact of that kick drum that I felt was missing. So I'm going to toggle this on and off again in solo, so you can kind of hear the difference. I think that sounds much better. Again, the sound isn't super drastic, but in the mix, it's exactly what it needed to really stand out, to really shine. So this drum room mono. So let's listen to this guy again. And let's see what I've got going on. All right, again, reaching for the RC500 equalizer. Very similar moves, except in this case, I'm going for like 1.8K, somewhere around there, and I am doing a huge boost. Again, the way this sounded in the track, I love the sound of what they've got going on here, but I really wanted that room sound to come out. So let's play this again, and I'll bypass in and out. Yeah. Yeah, it just sounds a little flat. Absolutely, I'm loving that. I think that's going to sound great in the mix. I think that's it, so let's look at that. All right, so the next thing, let's move on to the kick drums. All right, so we've got a good overhead and room sound going on, and I think we're all fairly happy with that. I just want to make sure these are back where they should be. All right, there we go. So let's move on to the kick drum. The kick drum, for me, especially in a rock tune, needs to be heavy, needs to have a lot of attack, and it needs to be very, very present in the mix. If it's not any of those things, then for me, a rock track, it's kind of just failed. So let's listen to this again with the overhead processing we've done, and let's listen specifically to the kick drum. All right, let's solo these up and just kind of hear what we've got to work with. So this is a bus that is being fed by all three of the recorded kick drums that they did. So we could just solo these real quick individually here. So it's like a kick out mic. Or I'm sorry, that was a kick in. This is the kick out, kick in two. So maybe a beater side kick drum mic. And then a kick out mic, so probably like a FET condenser. Yeah, something that's outside of the front kick drum head. All right, so we've got those. Those are our recorded kick drums. They also sent me this sample, which sounds like a... No, I'm sorry, they did not send me the sample. This is a sample I added. And I did another video about how I like to use samples, so feel free to check that out as well. I'm not really going to go into that since we have so much to cover in this video. This kick sample is one that I added. So let's listen to the sample I've picked here. All right, so you're listening to that and you're saying, man, there's already a lot of attack on that. There's a lot of body. That is true. However, in the mix, I want more. I want more of that big fat sound. So let's solo out the drums and let's just kind of go, let's look at the fat channel settings I have for the recorded kick drum microphones. So let's start with the equalizer here. So again, the RC500 equalizer, love the top end on this. I've got it set to a shelf. Right at 5K, I am boosting a heavy amount. If I had to guess, I mean, this is 0 right here in the middle, 16, so that's probably close to 9 dB, 10 dB of gain at 5 kilohertz. I took a healthy amount out right around 480 hertz. I just felt like there was a little bit of boxiness there that was kind of muddying up the sound, especially when we got the bass guitar in there, and that really helped kind of clean that area up. Big bump at 48 hertz, somewhere around there. Did not mean to move that. Again, I'm using a shelf, so this is adding all that low end to the whole bottom end of the track. RC500 compressor. I've got this on a, if I had to guess, it's probably about 30 millisecond attack time. fairly fast release, probably about 140 or 150 millisecond release time. You'll watch here, I am not getting a ton of gain reduction, and that's going to be a recurring theme with me. When I was first mixing, one of the things I was guilty of is I thought you had to just slam things with compression to get that punch, to get that hard knock sound that I was after, especially on big rock records. And I was just killing my tracks, and for the longest time I couldn't figure out why. Well, that was why. You don't need a lot of compression, especially if you've got 2 dB of gain reduction on your mix bus. You've got 2 dB of gain reduction on your drum bus. So there you've already got 4 dB of gain reduction. Do you really need to add 6 dB of gain reduction to your kick drum track to get it to sound right? No, you don't. Less is more, especially, these things add up over the course of the mix. So let's watch here. I'm going to play this, and we'll kind of look at, let's turn off the sample, and just kind of watch the needle on this compressor, and then I'm going to toggle this on and off so you can kind of hear what both processors are doing. Again, nothing super drastic, but in the course of the mix, it's really going to work out well. Let's look at this sample, because this is kind of where the magic happens. So I'll tell you what, let's play this track without the sample. So this is everything we've done so far, processing-wise, and let's play this without that kick sample, and we'll just kind of talk about why I felt like I needed a sample in here. All right, so the kick drum sounds okay. It sounds good. It's not bad, but it was missing a little bit of body for me, a little bit of that sub low end. So when he hits, it's like that impact was really missing for me. So I felt like adding a sample in there would really help bring that kick drum to life. So that's what we've done here. So let's take a look at the processing. Again, we've got this saturation knob on here. I love the harmonics this thing is putting out. I've actually got this going all the way up to 1, which is something that I do pretty typically. On individual tracks. 1 is kind of a good starting point for me, and especially with how hard this kick was hitting. Anything above that was starting to add some distortion, and that's not really what we're going for here. So next thing up, again, the fat channel. Let's look at the EQ. So we've got a new EQ. We are using the vintage EQ, and if you are familiar at all with any of the emulations out there from Waves or Slate Digital or any of the other plugin companies, you know that this is a Neve style EQ. So for this kick drum, I have this high shelf pushed pretty hot, and I believe this starts at around 12K. I've got this pushed pretty hot on 7 dB. I am adding another 3 dB at 7.2K. I'm not doing anything with the low mid frequency, and then at 60 hertz, I'm doing another fairly big push, like 5 dB. Same thing with this compressor here. You're gonna see I'm not getting just a ton of gain reduction out of this, and you don't have to. You don't have to kill it to get it to have that extra punch. So let's look here. Let's turn this on, and we will play. Let's just solo this by itself. I'm gonna turn it up here, and I'll pop the processing in and out so we can hear the difference. I like that a lot. Again, it gives it some extra attack, and you're hearing that solo, and you're probably like, that is a horrible kick drum sound. Well, again, remember, this sample is not our primary kick drum sound. Our recorded kicks are our primary kick drum sound. This is to fill in what I thought was missing, and I did try to achieve some of this with EQ on those recorded kicks, but the low end was just not working for me, and the high end was starting to sound harsh. It wasn't very smooth and pleasing. So if you imagine, we've got our recorded kick drums that are sitting right here, and now we've got this sample that's kind of coming up around that to fill in that top end and that low end, and that's really what I'm using this for. So let's play these. I'm gonna start with this kick sample off, and then I'll add it back in so you can kind of hear what that sounds like. That's more the level I had it. Subtle thing, very subtle. And then that's going to be the word of the day. The word of the video series is subtle, subtle, subtle. All right, so let's listen to this whole kit with what we've got going on processing wise and kind of see where we're at. All right, I'm really, really happy with where that's at so far. So let's take a look next at the snare drum. So this snare drum needs some help. It needs a lot of help. I need it to be big. I need it to be fat. I almost want it to be, you know, in your face, so to speak. So let's listen here to this snare drum, just this snare by itself. I'm going to open this up because these are all the snare tracks they sent me. Some of them are recorded. Some of them for sure are samples. But let's kind of listen to what's going on with this whole group of snare tracks here. Okay, first of all, really, really busy snare track. So there's a lot of ghost notes going on there. I don't know if when they were recording the sample of this, if they just had the threshold too low and it was picking up some of the other drum hits. But it's a very, very busy snare track. So let's look at what we've got going on here. Again, saturation knob, no surprise there. There is a big surprise here. I have this pushed all the way to 6.8. That is huge. You're like, okay, that's ridiculous. And in fact, let's watch and see what that looks like. We are getting some massive saturation. What is going on here? Okay, I am using parallel processing. Quick side note. With a lot of other plug-in manufacturers, Slate Digital being the biggest one that I know of that does this, they include a mix knob on just about all of their modules. What that allows you to do is dial in the settings and maybe dial in some extreme settings and then dial that mix knob back a little bit to like 50% or less, you know, whatever you need. And that blends the dry signal, so the unprocessed signal, with the wet signal or the signal that has all the processing applied. So what that does is that really creates an interesting dynamic. You're hearing the original source, and then you've got kind of like this extreme processing underneath, which maybe doesn't completely destroy your original sound, but adds just enough of this extreme character to really bring that focus up in the mix. Here's how we're doing parallel processing in Studio One, because this plugin does not have a mix knob. So instead of cloning the track and putting this on it and then bringing that track up a little bit, because I've already got a boatload of drum tracks here. I do not need another drum track to worry about. So Studio One, I think it was version 4 or maybe 3.5, one of the earlier versions introduced this routing tab up here. It's right here. And we can have splitters. So what I have done here is I have created a splitter on my snare track, and the default split mode is normal. What this does is this now creates 2 parallel sends of that signal. This one right here is, I've got my saturation knob on it, and this is the dry unprocessed signal, and then each of these have a little fader here, right, for level adjustment. I have this saturation knob turned down 21 dB, almost 22 dB, so I am essentially blending that signal back in with the original signal. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring this all the way up, and nope, I'm not even going to do that. I'm going to take this out of this splitter. I'm going to put it up here, and let's hear what this saturation is doing to this snare drum track. That sounds disgusting, right? Well, it does when it's just absolutely blowing out the track. Here's what I needed, and here's what I was hearing. I needed this snare drum to have some more snare sound. And yes, I could have reached for a sample, and I could have gone through the process of cloning the track, printing the sample, but I didn't feel like another snare track is what this needed. What I needed was just something to give me the illusion of more snare vibrations. Well, this saturation knob does that via distortion. So what I've done is I've added this splitter onto the track. I'm putting this splitter over here. I'm blending this back in with the dry signal, and now let's hear what this sounds like in parallel with the unprocessed signal. Subtle thing, but it works. In the mix, it really, really works. So what I've done here again, since we're here talking, what I've done here is I've got this splitter. This sound is being blended with this signal. What I've done here is I've added another splitter. So basically, I needed this compressor to also be parallel compressed. And the reason is I want kind of an extreme compression setting on that snare to really give it some decay, to really lengthen it. It was too short for me. It was like pop, pop, and then it's done. Well, in the context of this song, I need it to be this big bah, bah. Every time the drummer hits it, it needs to feel like it's filling up the whole room. So to do that, let's take a listen. Let's get back into this into the splitter here. Let's listen to what this fat comp is doing, not split. So this is how it's affecting the signal as a whole. All right, so a lot of punch. Slowest attack, fastest release, ton of gain reduction, ton of punch. It's almost abrasive to the ears. But again, when we go back here and we add this in parallel, now all of a sudden, let's listen to this. Again, it just lengthens that snare. It brings up that room sound as well to make it feel bigger, to make it feel fatter, to make it feel like it's taking up more of that space. Final step in the process here. We're getting here. The snare drum was complex, but we're almost there. So to wrap up this, I'm done with my parallel processing on these guys. I have this fat EQ, and I've renamed these plugins so that I can quickly see which ones are doing what here. I'm using the RC500 again. Again, very smooth top end. I am adding a lot of 3K to this sample. I really want this to cut through this mix. And that to me, that 3K is kind of right where that snare drum crack lives, at least for this particular snare. Adding a lot of low end, big boost to low end here at 150 hertz. I'm adding like, I don't know, 4 or 5 dB, and you're saying, do you really need all that low end in the snare drum? Yes, we do. We do. It needs to feel big and fat. Do not be afraid to add EQ to things. I know that's like contrary to everything I've been saying up to this point is little tiny moves. Well, sometimes it calls for a big move, and this snare drum calls for a big move, and it sounds fantastic. So let's give this a listen. Just this EQ along with all the other processing. I'll pop it in and out, and we'll hear the difference. I think it sounds great. I think that's going to sound fantastic in the mix. So let's collapse that down. And I believe that was the last thing. No, it's not. We are still not done, folks. The hi-hat track. Oh, the dreaded hi-hat track. What do we do with a hi-hat track? Let's listen to this dog by itself and see what's going on here. It's a hi-hat track. However, there's a lot of fat low end in there. It's kind of muddied. In the context of the mix, I felt like it was getting buried quite a bit. Let's listen to this here. All right, so let's look and see what we've got going on here. I'm reaching for the VT1 EQ this time. We've got a little bit of a high-end boost, a pretty big low-mid boost. I felt like this is kind of where those chunky frequencies were in the hi-hat, and I really just wanted to take those out. Next, we've got 80 hertz, and I'm cutting a shelf of 80 hertz. So this is interesting. This is a technique I picked up a while ago, and I use it. I don't use it all the time, but in instances like this, instead of just reaching for a high-pass filter, which I could easily do. It's right here under this tab here. I could have just grabbed this high-pass filter. What this does is it creates a shelf, and so at 80 hertz, I am basically turning down all the low end. I'm not rolling it all the way off. I'm just turning it down to where it's manageable, so we're not getting a lot of that extra rumble. Let's listen to this hi-hat track before and after. I'll pop the EQ in and out. Let's turn it up so we can hear it. So again, I haven't completely killed the body of it by any means. There's still a good amount of body there. The difference is that now it just feels like it sits in the mix a little bit better. So let's take a listen to that. Nah, we've already listened to that. Let's move on to the toms. So These toms, interestingly enough, I didn't feel like needed a ton of processing. Let's go to this section right here where these toms are and just kind of listen to this tom fill real quick. We'll just solo up the drums here. Okay, with all the processing we've done on the main bus and the drum bus, those toms already sound pretty good. Really what I wanted, and let's listen to them here in the mix one more time. I'm gonna turn them up just so we can kind of hear them. I still wanted them to be fatter, like that kick drum is pounding away and the snare drum's pounding away. I wanted those toms just to have a little bit more of that low end resonance. So again, fat channel EQ, equalizer, pretty big boost at, I'm guessing like probably around 90 or 100 hertz right here. And let's see, I added quite a bit of like 2.5K. I say quite a bit, probably like 3 dB of 2.5K, just to give it that. That's where on toms, that's really where that stick attack tends to sit. So really want that, you know, when the drummer hits those toms, that's really what that ta, that's where that comes from. And again, added quite a bit of presence up here. That's where the tone, that drum, the high end tone is going to come from. Added quite a bit at around just shy of 6K. So let's listen to those again with the EQ off, and then I'll pop it back on. All right, again, they sound a little artificial to me, but in the mix, they really needed that to come out. And when everything's plucking away, you're not listening to the song and you think, oh my gosh, those toms sound fake. No, they actually sound really good. They cut through. So let's listen to this in context with everything else that's going on. So again, no EQ turned on, anything else, just the drum processing we've done. I'm going to collapse these toms here, and let's give a listen to where we're at so far. Let's go down here. All right, so that sounds really good. One thing though, the snare is just not big enough for me. It's just not. We need to give it something more. We need to give it some juice, something exciting. Snare reverb is how we're gonna do that. So I created a send here with the snare reverb. I created another tutorial a while back called how to get a bigger mix or a wider mix using only stock plugins, and I talk about this exact technique right here. Excuse me 1 minute. I talk about this exact technique, and it is using the PreSonus Room Reverb, and it's on a the width is all the way as wide as you can go. The size is fairly decent. The reflection mix is all the way up, so we're hearing less of the early reflections, more of the decay. And let's kind of hear what this snare reverb sounds like just by itself. All right, so that's pretty good. However, again, in the mix, I'm afraid that's not going to be loud enough. It's going to get buried. Let's turn this up even a little bit. So I've added an EQ after the reverb where we are adding quite a bit of high-end shelf here at around 2.5K. We're adding like 5, almost 6 dB of a shelf here. And then we're adding another bell boost at, where are we at, 1.5K, 1.4K. Again, that's where that snare crack comes from. So let's listen to that with that EQ. Again, this is going to give that snare some space. That high-end boost is really going to make it cut through on the sides of the mix. So let's listen to that whole snare drum mix here, and let's put that reverb back to where it was. There it is. All right, and let's listen to that. Yep, really just opens up the width on that. And again, it doesn't sound unnatural. It doesn't even really sound like, oh, they added a reverb to the snare, which is the point. We really just want to give this snare a sense of space. Final thing. Overall, I feel like the drums are just missing a little bit of punch, especially by the time we get the guitars going in here. In fact, let's listen to that. So this is everything we've done so far, including the snare reverb. All right, drum punch. So this is like something more extreme I will do. I am going for the stock compressor. This is the Presonus. It's just called compressor. It doesn't get any more generic than that. However, this compressor is anything but generic. In fact, it has a couple of features in here we're going to talk about that I love, this compressor will only do what I need it to do. This is the only compressor that does what I need it to do for this task. And that's why I love it. So what we're doing here, first thing, let's just talk through these real quick. Ratio, 6.7 to 1. Threshold, -25. Soft or a sharp knee. So that means this knee is happening pretty sharp here. Excuse me. We're adding a little bit of input gain. Attack time, fairly slow. Release time, very quick. We're doing some makeup gain here. Adaptive. So this is unique to the Presonus EQ, and without going into too much technical detail, basically it analyzes the content and adapts the threshold to, I believe it's the threshold, at least it sounds like the threshold to me, and probably some of these attack and release times as well, to the content that's coming in. So it is grabbing all of the transients equally, kind of regardless of their decibel level. So let's listen to what this processor is doing and see how we can kind of use this in the mix. It would really, really help if I had the sends turned on. Let's give that one more try. Let's listen to this. All right, so just like the send suggests, punch. That is all we're doing here. We're not worried about decay. We're not worried about tone. We are strictly after those transients. So let's listen to this again one more time, and I'm going to turn off this adaptive, and you can kind of hear why this is important. It just obliterates all of the decay of the instrument and just allows those transients to come through, which is exactly what we want. So let's listen to our drum track. We're going to blend this back in as the track plays, and we'll kind of hear some of that presence come back up in the mix. All right, we're going to turn it off. Again, as you can hear, we're not looking to, this should not be the dominant sound. It's just enough to give those transients a little extra knock, that kick drum and that snare drum. And those are, by the way, the only three things we're sending to this. We're not sending any of the other drums to this. This is just to give the core instruments of that beat pattern some extra punch, some extra weight. All right, so that is drums. Whew. All right, that is a doozy. A lot of stuff to cover, and the reason I chose this song for drums is there's so much going on with the drums. I thought it kind of gave us a really good in-depth look of how to process the drums, especially in a big rock environment like this. Hope this has helped. Again, my name's Chris Gill. If you like this video, hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll be having more of these coming out very soon. I hope you're enjoying them. I'm having a blast making them, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.